we the underdogs, underestimated, yeah. Underrated, we the underdogs, underestimated, we the underdogs,
It's the Underdogs back with you. Another week, another story of chaos in college football. We're going to break it all down today. Joining me, as always, is legendary football outsider Peter Keating and legendary NBC Sports college football insider Nicole Auerbach. Peter, you're always stuck with me. Nicole, how does it feel to be back with us for the second time this season?
Well, yeah, welcome back, Nicole.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I mean, there have been a lot of underdog stories, a lot of upsets in this sport this season. It's becoming something of a theme, I would say, for this college football season. So can't say I'm surprised to be back on the show. Lots for you guys to talk about, I'm sure. Plus, I mean, obviously, we talked about Jersey a lot last time. I knew that would be what the people demanded, that we needed to have more Jersey on the show.
Should we get that out of the way early, Jordan?
Sure,
Rutgers,
yeah.
Rutgers overcoming the early 6-0 deficit, storming back, throwing the kitchen sink at Minnesota. You know, they got a safety in that game. Our guy, Kalek Manis, you know, the exciting Rutgers quarterback throwing
The
for
Greek
a few
rifle.
touchdowns. Yeah. I don't have a nickname for the kicker yet, Jay Patel, but I'm sure there's a good Jersey nickname in there for him too. Look, overachieving spunky team, wouldn't you say? Let's take as much time as we can from Jordan
Well,
to talk about Rutgers.
I wanted to stick in the Hudson Valley, but a slightly different twist. Nicole, what is the better underdog story on the banks of the Hudson River this year? Is it A, Army, or B, my 10U girls travel softball team winning the Greater Hudson Valley Softball League Championship in our first year of being a team?
Well, I feel like that was a leading question, but it's clearly softball. That was my
Thank
sport
you.
growing up, which I don't even think you knew that. So obviously, I'm going to ride with softball. I was a fast-paced pitcher all the way through high school. So that is awesome. Congratulations. Also, Army is awesome. And guys, we are like very close to a scenario of having back-to-back Army Navy games. Is the world ready for that possibility that we could have that as the American Conference Championship game and the traditional Army Navy game?
I think that would beat Duke playing Carolina in the Final Four. I mean, that would just break everything.
Yeah. And that Army Notre Dame game is shaping up to be pretty important.
Yep.
I mean, Notre Dame's got to take that game really seriously.
Yeah, although they did the same with Navy and they dispatched them pretty easily.
They handled them pretty easily. Yeah.
Yeah, but
By
no,
the way,
you're right.
I
I mean, it's pretty cool because it does add something for Notre Dame's schedule down the stretch because, you know, like we thought that Florida State game was going to be like the marquee game there. No, not really. USC also not playing very well. So like that's fun. And then, yeah, I mean, I love service academies. Also, like, as you guys know, they're throwing the ball a little more, like they're doing some different interesting stuff. So I think it's an awesome story that Army, although the committee doesn't seem to like them, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee doesn't seem to be giving them much of a chance to like overtake Boise State and get into the playoff. But listen, we're the serious people. We understand. We appreciate, we respect the troops enough.
Yeah, it's
By the
interesting,
way-
like, you know, for all of the committee's love of these gaudy records, you know, like Indiana's
theirs.
now number 5 and, you know, they love BYU, but not so much love for Army. Why is the Army the one team where they seem to be taking schedule strength into consideration?
But by the way, I
don't know.
somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I did know that you played softball. I don't know why. Secondly, if you'd like to come work with my Bulldogs pitchers, it's an open invitation. But third of all, Army, if they beat Notre Dame, do they leapfrog Boise State? What does that do to the whole dynamic? Because suddenly that's a huge quality win and you can't question them anymore.
Yeah, and it would be better than Boise State's best win.
Right.
You know, I mean, Boise State has a really strong resume because, you know, they played well against the teams. I got questions about their defense, but that's a separate thing. And then their only loss is a 3-point loss to the number 1 team in the country. So yeah, no, I think that would drastically change everything for that 5th spot in the bracket. And I mean, you guys, I know we've said this and Big 12 fans are not very happy about it, but like there is definitely also a possibility that the group of 5 champion gets the 4 seed and gets a bye. If there's an upset or something, if, you know, with the Big 12, because the committee, as much as they course corrected to adjust BYU's ranking and Indiana's ranking, because they were too low a week ago, They still don't have a ton of respect for the Big 12. The next best teams are Kansas State at 16 and Colorado at 17. So they're not really well positioned to get 2 teams in. So yeah, you're right. It's been like very strange and somewhat inconsistent. Again, like BYU being 9th in the rankings the first set last week, being undefeated with 2 top 25 wins behind teams like Texas and Penn State that don't really have any signature wins. Great point about like the gaudy records. You have that. And then I don't know if it's just the lack of respect for maybe the schedule and the teams that Army has played. We know they haven't played a ton of teams that are over 500 or that will be bowling at the end of the year. But Boise State's been getting some credit for its wins in the Mountain West, where there's certainly teams that aren't very good in that conference as well.
Jordan, it's interesting, like, mention to 12 teams has meshed well with the overall rankings in terms of the committee evaluating margin of victory against strength of schedule. I think there's, for every example you have of a team that's rated maybe too high because they have a gaudy record, there's another example of a team that it's like we just talked about with, Indiana and Army. I mean, there's other examples at the other end of the spectrum where they're trying to reward teams for having quality wins or tough schedules, but they're not finding ways to do it consistently. I'll just say, Jordan, week after you mocked me for mentioning South Carolina on this show, they actually cracked the top 25. They're 20, they're now 21. Jordan didn't think that I should bring up South Carolina, even though they're the best pass rush in the country and they're playing better than anybody.
They're a good team.
Really good team. But there's a big difference between rewarding a team like that by slotting them in, somewhere in the 20s and figuring out how it's all going to fit together in the top 12. I don't think they have the analytics of this sorted out yet.
No, I don't either. So I went through the mock. Have you guys done it? Have you guys done the exercise, the mock?
They've never wanted us, Nicole.
Okay.
They've never been interested in having us in the room where it happens.
We haven't done it officially, Nicole. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you can pull some strings,
pay your own way and just show up and they'll let you do it if you really want to. Because like I actually think you guys would also be pretty critical about like the data that they get. Because I've been thinking about that. I did it in September because I did it the first year. It's the same process, but I wanted a refresher. And I also wanted to go through like the seeding stuff because already, as you guys know, like fans are wildly confused about the seeding. Every time I put out a bracket, they're like, why is BYU ranked ahead of Ohio State? That makes no sense. Well, it's because they're seeds and they have to be a conference champion. No one understands that. They still don't. It's very confusing.
Wait a minute. It's not that complicated a process. There's 4 conference champions and they're the top 4.
No, but it's really mixing people up. Peaking this week with Miami, losing.
As 4, they're listed as a 4 and a 9 next to their name, right?
Yeah.
Again, like if you look at the set of rankings, and those are the rankings we use throughout the week, right? So you're like, oh, number 9, Miami plays whatever. Then you look at a bracket and they're number 4. People are getting confused between seeds versus rankings.
Okay.
And but that was something, again, going through the process, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a huge problem. Like this is really going to confuse people. And it's definitely going to anger people if, like in this week's rankings where Boise State was 13th, so they bumped somebody out technically, right? Because they're not in the top 12 already. So that's like, that stuff's going to be frustrating, but the metrics. So, they like to be like, strength of schedule is not super, super important. Like we talk about teams in the same group, like a band, if you're like, oh, your strength schedule is 8th and yours is 15th, like they're pretty similar. But they don't really go through the methodology of how they do their strength of schedule. And there's other areas where they are ranking 1 through 134 for FBS that they're kind of like it's a chicken or the egg situation. They're doing it so then they can rank other things, but they're impacting all of the data by doing that arbitrary 1 through 134. And then there's color coding, which I also think you guys would have issues with because like, it's like drawing your eyes to, ooh, really good win, really bad loss. Like, and it's trying to get the room to the same conclusions, I think. And they would justify, well, it's just simpler, it's easier, whatever, but it manipulates the way you think about the data. So anyway, I would love, you guys need to crash the mock.
That's a good story. Hurting through the metrics and the color coding.
Yeah, Peter doesn't see color, so it's actually going to be very helpful in having him in the room.
No, he's being ridiculous. No, don't listen to anything don't take anything Jordan says seriously, except for whatever he's going to say next.
Yeah, here's something you should take seriously. Okay, so we talked about.
I called that.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about the gaudy records at the top and the need for analytics at the bottom. So the SEC. We talked last week about the opportunities for maximum chaos, and they happened this past week. Things could continue in that direction. A, are we going to see a 3-loss team in the playoff? B, how do you make sense of this conference and figure out these teams that are all beating each other up, who's on the outside, who's on the inside?
Okay. This is incredibly hard to do. I feel like there's so many teams in the SEC that the way that they play one week does not carry over into how they play the following week. So it's very hard to predict how the teams are going to be when they actually take the field. Okay, so one quick plea, if anyone is listening, can make this happen. 9 conference games. You need to play each other more so that you have more head-to-head results with some of these teams that are going to be compared in this era of mega conferences. Like we need to go higher up on the tiebreakers if we can. So please play each other a little bit more. The simple scenarios at this point are if Tennessee wins out, which I don't think they're going to do, and then Texas and Texas A&M win out until they play each other at the end, then the winner of that game plays Tennessee for the SEC championship. I don't think we're going to get that, right? I think Georgia, despite all their flaws, they've been trending in the wrong direction. Carson Beck is not a good quarterback. He's thrown a lot of interceptions. They don't trust him. They don't really you saw the way they were like throwing behind the line of scrimmage. They're very, very horizontal, but they won't take him out. So like they're very handcuffed with what they want to do offensively right now. But the defense has been mostly good. It was great against Texas. They have that capability. We don't know about Nico, if he's going to play, what his status is. Tennessee's defense, also great. I think it'll be a low-scoring game, but I think Georgia wins this. And I think then they stay in the mix as a 2-loss team. I don't know if we'll get all the way to a 3-loss team. I know we've been calling these games elimination games because, again, we don't know. It's the first year of the playoff. There have been 3-loss teams that have made New Year's Six bowls in the past 10 years. So I know that's where people are, kind of basing that historical trend on. But this year, you just have a lot of like 1-loss teams and 2-loss teams that are not going to be playing in conference championship games. So I don't know that you would go all the way down the list that much, but it certainly depends on if the Big 12 and the ACC end up being 1-bid leagues. Because then that does open up some spots. We know Notre Dame, if they win out, they're probably going to host as well. So that takes up a spot. So I don't know yet if we're going to go down the totem pole enough to have a 3-loss team in there, but it would definitely be from the SEC, of course.
But you just said it. If let's say a 2-loss team makes it to the SEC championship game and say loses to Texas, gets its 3rd loss, are you going to penalize them for being a 3-loss team but making the conference championship game and reward a 2-loss team that didn't even make that? That's the question you're going to hear over and over and over and over from the talking heads.
And that's a good question because listen.
Thank you.
Yes, congratulations, Jordan. You asked a great question. The scenario here that you want to avoid is something where you're incentivizing something that like the people who made the playoff do not want to incentivize. The SEC loves its conference championship game. The reason basically that they're still existing, even though you definitely don't need them now that you have an expanded playoff, is because conferences, mostly the SEC, really care about the SEC championship game. You do not want a scenario where you are incentivizing teams to like sit guys or try to lose games down the stretch to avoid playing in that game because a loss hurts you. Now, I would argue last year that Oregon playing and losing to Washington again in another close game in the Pac-12 championship game did hurt them. Based on just like the order of the teams, it didn't matter for the top 4, but the order of the teams kind of the rest of the way down the top 10. That's something that the committee, I think, is going to have to be very, very careful for. Because when you talk to the CFP officials, when I went through the mock, they're like, I don't think that they're going to penalize teams. Like they're playing an extra game. A lot of other teams aren't. It should help the team that wins, but it really shouldn't hurt the team that loses. But we're so conditioned to looking at that win-loss record next to every team's name. Until we see that happen, it's hard to imagine. But if a team, like let's say it's Georgia, right? And then they lose in the SEC championship game, they get left out. Like Greg Sankey goes apoplectic over that. Like that is not what's supposed to happen in this model. And I think then you're going to hear a lot of people complaining, like we shouldn't have a human selection committee, right? Like this stuff should be maybe the multiple auto bids. Like that's where that stuff happens if this goes awry. So you're right. That's what's going to be really fascinating here if teams actually get penalized for an extra loss.
That's why we need more.
An AI selection committee?
No chat GPT.
We need
please.
more conference games because look, when the top teams have met this season, top teams have met 27 times this season. In 23 of those cases, the head-to-head winner is now ranked above the head-to-head loser. So whether or not it's supposed to count, head-to-head
helping.
matters when people think about this. You need more head-to-heads earlier in the season so you don't end up with this, so many one-loss teams that
don't play
didn't
each other.
play each
Yeah.
other. Can I ask you guys my one big question that I had, which is, depending on who you use as a conference champion as a placeholder right now, you're going to get very different seedings, right? So how many teams do we see coming out of the ACC? If it's SMU, then that probably knocks a different team out of the top 12 than if it's Miami. And I'm wondering if Ole Miss's my secret, well, not so secret anymore, my dark horse contender for getting in doing damage. I wonder if their bid to get a top 12 spot rides, ironically enough, on who's in there from the ACC and how many.
It
Nicole,
might.
you want to take this?
Yeah, I'll take this. So first of all, I think that the ACC is kind of like on the borderline. Like that's what I was most interested to see after a loss where Miami fit in. So them being at number 9 leaves the door open for an at-large team, even though like they do not have good wins. They do not have good wins, and their strength of schedule is not great because they didn't play any of the other top ACC teams. Like that's why they had a bunch of weird tiebreaker scenarios. So it's just very. I think that would rub me the wrong way. I also think they could justify and be like, game control and like just the defense has been averaging over 31 points a game in ACC play. It's taken these like heroics to win these games that they have won. You could justify it, but I think that is the committee saying like, we're leaving the door open. You've got a chance here. But again, their resume, if they lost to SMU in the title game, would basically be the losses. They don't have those marquee wins. So I'd be fascinated if they stay in that range, but that's a possibility much more so than the Big 12. But Peter, you're right. I mean, that's where like, this is all like March Madness. This is all like the bubble where you can't root just for your team. You have to root for other things to happen. So you need the teams that you beat to continue to play well. And you need the teams that you're being compared against to lose and to have different things happen. I kind of want chaos. Like I kind of want some of these championship game upsets just to see what happens. Like, come on, we want these selection committees members to actually have to do something, right? So that would be interesting to me. But yes, that is another scenario where somebody bumps somebody else out. I'm just going to call them all bid thieves, right? If we get an upset in the championship game, just like we do with basketball.
I don't see a bid thief in the ACC, and I'll tell you why. Because Miami might be number 9 now with 1 loss, but by definition, if they aren't the conference champion, they will have lost another game to SMU. I don't see them getting in with 2 losses. You think they would
drop further?
I think that's a play. An SMU Miami game at this point is a play-in game. I don't see either of those teams getting in with 2 losses against a bunch of SEC 2-loss teams. That's my opinion, but I don't know. I've been born with the gift of clairvoyance, guys, and I can see down the path and where this is headed. I just can't speak right now because of my throat.
Yeah, I think it's a very real possibility that the ACC and the Big 12 are one bid leagues. Definitely.
All right. Well, Peter, should we let Nicole say something about the Big 10 before we have to run? And
I guess there's a lot of teams in that conference now, so we should say something.
All right. Say something about the Big 10.
Okay. Indiana.
Yeah.
Yeah. We love Indiana.
They're just awesome. Like, listen, like they're the story of the season so far. Big game against Ohio State coming up soon. I'm fascinated as we talk about what all this means. They don't have, their strength of schedule has been something that they get dinged for. They don't have, those marquee wins. Do they have to stay close against Ohio State? If that's their only loss, does that still resume that gets them into the playoff? Does it get them in a position to host a game? All of that's up in the air still. Really, really questionable. And I will say it's funny that we went like 20 minutes without talking about Oregon, because for all the chaos that has existed in college football, Oregon's just like minding its own business and winning all of its games. The last team from the preseason top 25 to be unbeaten. And the last time that this happened, where only one team did that this late in the season, 2014. So it's been chaos, but Oregon's kind of been riding pretty consistently without them. So just don't want to forget them.
Yeah, let's close with that. Are they that much better than everyone else, or is it are they number one by virtue of circumstance too?
Well, I don't know. We don't know how much better they are than everyone else. They've been more consistent than everybody else. And I think that they've gotten better over the course of the season. They had those offensive line issues early in the season that they worked through. But what I would say is they also have flaws. Everyone's got flaws, which is why I think once we get to the actual bracket, it's going to be really fun. And we're going to see potentially some actual upsets, which I don't know the people designing this necessarily thought, a 12 could really beat a 5 or 11 could beat a 6. I think this year we might see some of that.
Good year for a
Peter,
playoff.
Peter, you know who has no flaws? Yeah, that's right. Nicole Auerbach.
Oh,
Always a perfect performance when she joins us. Nicole, you got to come back and back and back and back. And then we got to do college basketball. And then you'll just be our third member of the show. It's destined.
But just keep
Great.
busting brackets all year.
Love
right.
that. And then
get us
apparently
into that selection room, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah,
and then
we'll
I'm
do the mock.
apparently also coaching a softball team now. So it's been an eventful show. We've
Really? You've just
Yes.
signed on to a lot of stuff without any consent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that optimistic note, I am Jordan. That's Peter. That's Nicole. Let's enjoy the last few weeks of college football because chaos is awesome.
Meeting next at the TikTok Diner.